Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Classic Chloe Show. I'm your host, Chloe Castillo, and I've got an amazing musical guest for you today. My friend Daniel Erbe is a 13-year Army veteran, patriot, and a 25-plus year music professional. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chloe, for having me.
Of course, great to see you again. So Daniel has had some pretty awesome musical experiences lately. He performed at the RNC, did a fantastic job performing, and I want to talk to him a little bit first, though, before we jump into that, about his earlier musical experiences. So just to jump in here, tell us about your background in music, where you came from, how were you classically trained, what was that like for you?
Sure. Well, I am a 30-year performing artist. I've had 10 years experience as a professional opera singer and 13 years as an elite musician in the Army. And I actually got started singing in a boy choir when I was 7 years old, touring Europe, traveling around, and that just gave me my love for singing and being on stage.
That's fantastic. I love it. So I know that you kind of you were at a crossroads in your career. You mentioned you were in the military, and I know that during COVID, the vaccine was set upon a lot of members of the military here, and you being one of those, you decided to stand by your values instead of bowing down to the government's very interesting ideas of who should be vaccinated with what drugs. I think we all know that's a little bit weird. So, what did you do though during that time? I know that your story is very interesting. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. There were many reasons why I decided not to enlist in or re-enlist in the military. I served 13 years, and there were a lot of reasons. But during that time, the vaccine mandate, that was a big one, and so I chose to stand for my medical and religious freedoms against the experimental vaccine. And, I also realized that as a conservative, middle aged white man in the new DEI and CRT initiative army, I just knew it was time for me to move on. And I became politically active after my military career.
So what did it look like for you when you kind of lost that, I guess, career? I don't want to say lost in a bad way because I think you did the right thing. But so I know that your music career changed pretty greatly though. So what was that like? Can you talk about that a little bit?
It did. It was a choice that I took for my religious and medical freedoms. And again, there were a lot of other reasons why I chose not to re-enlist in the military. But I do recall a conversation with members of my leadership telling me that even though might be able to stay in the military, I will never be a singer in the military again. That resonated. That really hurt. And that made me feel as though that my voice is not not worthy anymore. Um, and during that time of trying to figure out what I was going to do again, I went to the Pray Vote Stand conference held in Leesburg, Virginia, where I listened to Mary Milburn sing. And she's been singing for political rallies for a long, long time. Tears began dripping down my face because I, at one time, my entire career was was around singing patriotic music, and now I'm not able to sing again. And so I recall her praying with me after her performance. Little did I know that 2 years later I would be sharing the stage with her at the RNC National Convention in Milwaukee. So pretty amazing transformation. But after the military, I became very politically active. I went down to Georgia and I worked in the 2022 election cycle. And I found myself singing at Herschel Walker rallies. So I sang about 4 or 5 different Herschel Walker rallies. And And then I just kind of snowballed. Yeah, I'd networked with a lot of people. I met Matt and Mercedes Schlapp at CPAC in Orlando, and briefly shared my story with Matt. And they invited me to sing at CPAC DC in 2023, and I was reinvited to sing in 2024. So this is where kind of it just started. It started with singing at local political events, to state political events, to the national political events. And then again, aforementioned in July, I was singing the national anthem at the RNC National Convention in front of 25,000 people in person and in a worldwide audience of millions. So,
I think it's safe to say that God does amazing things with those kind of situations. You know, you think you're in the most dire of situations for how as far as your career goes, and then, you know, he does something amazing when you're probably not really expecting it. I can tell you for sure from my experience as a classical musician, when I was younger, I never imagined I'd be doing half the things I'm doing now. That was not in the books for me, not in my plans at all. I was actually quite stubborn about it as a kid. I remember my parents telling me, you know, "Oh, you don't have to be a pianist." And I was like, "Yes, I do." Dead set on it. And then, you know, God, I think through COVID actually as well, turned around my life and is it's I can say his plans were definitely much greater than the ones I had for myself. But with this all said, you know, I think that I love that story about Mary too. I think that the power of prayer is very much so real, and I think that it's great when conservatives come together and I guess kind of back each other in a way and pray together and really put their faith in God instead of in them in their own abilities, and if that makes sense. So I
absolutely.
want to ask you though. So through your political involvement, what was it just like performing at the RNC for all those people, like you said, thousands there, millions worldwide? Just what was that experience like? What was the greatest takeaway from it?
I tell you what, the day before I was taking a long 5 mile walk along Lake Michigan in Milwaukee, listening to praise and worship music and listening to devotionals and just thanking God for what he's delivered me from. He delivered me from standing up for my rights and my freedoms, leaving the military, again, my choice, but still leaving the military and finding myself knocking on doors in Georgia and talking about Herschel Walker and talking about Brian Kemp and advocating as a political advocate, and then singing at these events, and then finding myself 2 years later at a national political event, the RNC, and it was all about praising. I got up on stage and I looked out and I just saw the audience, and the energy in the arena was palpable. And as I took the stage, you know, I wasn't necessarily just like reclaiming my voice again. I was literally reclaiming my identity because I had lost my voice, figuratively, also even literally. That's another story. But it was an amazing time for me just to be grateful and to give God 100% praise and to look out into the audience. And, you know, no one really knew my story, but God did. And he knew what I had to overcome just to be at that moment. And now he prepared me so that I didn't get up there and make a fool out of myself, because I've had 30 years experience as a musician. But it was a transformation opportunity for me, and also to represent veterans, which I had been representing active military and veterans for my entire career on stage.
So I want to touch on this a little bit because you mentioned, you know, how you got involved in these kind of opportunities through being involved in politics, right? It wasn't like you came to the conservative movement and said, "I am a singer. You know, have this amazing voice. I've been trained for, like you said, like 30 plus years. You know, I mean, you're clearly very experienced. You didn't just like come out of the woodworks from nowhere." So I think that it's interesting though that the way you got involved was through politics. And I can say again, my own story. I had same thing here. I got involved, I guess, in political circles with the mission of, I guess, turning around our culture in our music industry specifically. But regardless of that, I got involved through political circles and trying to be more involved in politics and those kind of groups. So I think it's interesting, though. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's very interesting that the conservative movement, we know we don't really have a place for musicians or for art or for entertainment really at all. I mean, it's the entertainment we have is very, very small. Typically, it's along the lines of film, which is fantastic. But as far as music goes, we just don't really have not a lot of options. And so I just find it very interesting that you had to get into this situation or this opportunity, like at the RNC, for example. It was through politics. It was not because you said, hey, I'm a musician, and they said, oh, fantastic, here's, here are all these places for you to perform, here's the art side of the conservative movement, if that all makes sense. So I guess I'm just kind of getting at, we as conservatives have really been missing the opportunity to incorporate music and art into our movement and into our culture from our point of view. I mean, the left they're masters at this. They have been incorporating music and art and film and entertainment into their I guess, movement, that makes sense, for decades now, except they don't call it a movement. They just call it being dominant in everything possible in America. They dominate the music industry, they dominate the film industry, they dominate the medical industry. I mean, they're government half the time. They're everywhere. And we're kind of just focused in on government alone. We kind of put all of our eggs in one basket and say, okay, let's just elect this one person, which is important too. But how about getting the culture back? I think that's really important. So why do you think the conservative movement has been missing out on this opportunity for so many years?
I tell you what, the right actually has very few classical musicians and musicians that has stood up for what they believe in fear of losing their career or not even being able to start a career. And
Right.
I had seen that throughout my entire career as an opera singer and even in the military. As a conservative in the military, obviously, we're not supposed to be political while we're in uniform, but it was very obvious that you're a conservative, you're not really going to get very far. And so, and we still actually do see that in the performing arts. We saw that during COVID in 2020. And this is when I started just kind of taking a good hard look at myself as a musician and myself as a singer. You saw the left in like Broadway, coming out with all of these videos and social media posts about, masking up and taking the vaccine and because we need to protect everybody. And um, they were not allowing those that were unvaccinated to be working in New York City. So if you were on Broadway over at the Metropolitan Opera, you had to show a vaccination card in order to be able to keep your career. And so we've seen this prior, as far as conservatives, as far as Republicans, just not being able to share, who they are, what they believe in. I've got a friend, and we've all now heard Chris Macchio singing at all of these events, but his voice teacher, Emilio Pons, he had an opera career and he was completely ostracized because of him standing up for his conservative beliefs. And now he is literally coining himself now as the MAGA voice teacher in New York City, having lots of opportunities performing as well as teaching. And so it's those people that need to come out of the shadows and the woodworks to be able to stand up for who they are, to stand up for what they believe in, with politically, whether it's faith in our Lord, and be unashamed about it. I was just recently at an event with famous fashion designer Andre Soriano, who had also been ostracized out of Hollywood and out of California for standing for Trump and for whom he believes in. I had the opportunity to meet Joy Villa, who wore one of his Great America, Make America Great Again dresses at the Grammy Awards in 2017, and now we're talking about collaborating in some way in fashion. So it's the ones that want to stand up for who they are, what they believe in. If they love Trump, if they love the movement, let's be bold, let's be vocal about it, and let's also come together and start collaborating as professional artists and professional musicians. Because Chloe, you're starting a movement, and it's so inspiring, and we just need now people just to kind of come out of the shadows and be engaged. And actually, one thing that I wanted to share with your guests, and if anyone's listening, if the president would love to appoint me as a presidential appointee of the National Endowments for the Arts, that would be an incredible honor, or somewhere in a fine arts council, because we as conservatives, we need to be able to take back or just be an equal contributor to the arts and to this movement of classical musicians. So if anyone's listening, I'm available.
I love it. You got to sell yourself sometimes, right? But
Absolutely.
I want to touch on a couple things you just said there. So first of all, back to the beginning of what you were just talking about, you mentioned a little bit. I guess what I gathered from what you were saying is basically that on the conservative side, these musicians don't really have a place to go. Like you mentioned, Chris Macchio's instructor, and based off of that, let's just say he had a career already, and now he's coming out as conservative and more. I mean, that is incredible. I thank God for that. I think people who do that are fantastic. I think it's a brave thing to do, and I think it's very necessary. But think about the new people though who are coming in, and even people who I say new or like yourself, you had a lot of experience, but you weren't necessarily like in Hollywood or had this massive career. You were in the military, so you were, I guess, in a way, correct me if I'm wrong, almost kind of separated from the classical music scene that's left dominated because you were in the military. And then, I mean, maybe I'm wrong with saying this. I kind of think though that it's a little bit different as far as career paths. So, I think that as conservatives, we have got to have a place and an avenue for these musicians to go. Because if there's just no place, we're not supporting anything. We're just supporting, come sing the national anthem once in a while, which is great. But it's got to be more than that. It has to be a place, like you said. It has to be a movement, and it has to be people have to get engaged too. I think the classical music thing is fantastic. I'm a classical musician. I love classical music. I think we as classical musicians need to be involved, especially coming from a place of really knowing that beautiful real art. We live in a culture today where beauty just isn't really seen as important as it should be. And I think that classical music is one of the most beautiful forms of art. And so as conservatives, as conservative classical musicians, I think is very important. But even beyond that, we have to have all genres involved in this movement. The movement can't just be one genre focus. It has to be musicians from all walks of life, from all different genres, who just have these shared values and want to see America prosper, not dominated by the leftist, I don't know, dare I say, satanic pedophile groups that run Hollywood. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's a place for America to really thrive on entertainment when we're consuming this art and these creations that are made by these kind of people who own this kind of stuff. I don't think there's any way for that to go well, if that makes sense. So I guess what I'm saying is the conservative movement really needs to, I think, up our game in welcoming the arts into our movement and really promoting it a lot, way more than we ever have before. And so I think I'm totally behind you on that. I think that you're absolutely correct. And so with that said, let's take a quick pause for an ad break here. We'll be back with more from Daniel in just a second about the conservative movement, about classical music, and a little bit more about his career. So ad break, and we'll be right back.
Sounds rolling. All 3 cameras. We're good.
Speed.
Is there any regrets that you have in life? I should sit here and say, yeah, I got a lot of regrets. But when I look back on my life and I understand the lives that were lost, I mean, I'm sitting here with you. And I can tell my story.
Former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleaded guilty today to lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person. for Donald Trump to hire.
Really brilliant military career, serving 33 years.
Why was he being so elusive? Mike Flynn told the truth and faced life in prison.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn, one of America's most treasured military heroes. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Go to Patriot TV, click on Store, and grab a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own a treasured piece of American history. And get your own personal download link to watch America's most talked-about movie, as well as a DVD hand-signed by General Michael Flynn. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store. Incredible savings and a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
Welcome back to the show, Daniel. So great to have you on here. So let's just talk a little bit more about the conservative movement here. I'm kind of on a roll. So now that Donald Trump has been elected our 47th president, all praise be to God. What do you think about moving forward as far as music goes? Because I guess Americans at this point want to improve their lives in all aspects. We're looking for better health, better food, the Food and Drug Administration has got a lot of work to do, and we've got, a lot of work, I think, going into that now. And I think music and entertainment and culture, again, is a big part of making America great again over these next 4 years. At least it should be. And I think that if we want to have a strong nation, that starts at home. And what starts at home, of course, if you're going to have a strong family unit, that family needs to have, I think, some element of a good culture in their homes, in their lives, for their kids especially to consume. And so I guess my question for you is, what do you think is going to happen over these next 4 years? Do you think that, first of all, do you think music has a place in the rebuilding of America? And what does that look like? And then also, do you think that the classical music scene has a chance to grow now that we have, I guess, some more people invested in beauty in our culture?
I think it does, and I think one thing that the administration or whoever is at the White House planning events, I think they really need to have some of us that really took a stand and chose our freedoms. It chose to stand for Trump when a lot of musicians weren't standing for Trump, and we're all in the fight. That we have first priority to come perform for the president at the White House at events. We've got a handful of singers and instrumentalists that are invited to sing at these political events, and because that we've stood up and supported, there should be a little bit of, I would say, reward, rather than inviting people that just because they have a name and just because they had an incredible musical career, but that they were vocal against conservatism or being a Republican or whatever. I think that those that actually took the stand, they should get some first priority. But also, because of this exposure now, there should just be a way that and especially, it was such a landslide victory, so there are a lot of supporters out there. And so the people that are hiring classical musicians, the agents, the managers, the companies, the symphonies, these are things that they should be not ostracized for and not being ashamed to be able to stand up for who you are and for what you believe. And we just need to be having more of a voice. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, like you said, it's more than just the name. And I think we saw the name people kind of failed the Kamala Harris campaign. We had Lizzo, we had Beyonce, we had a lot of musicians with a lot of what I would call degenerate music performing at her rallies and coming out endorsing her, and some of them, granted, were good musicians, but they are, again, constantly speaking out against the conservative movement, against conservative values, against the value great. And so I think, as there's comes a certain point where we as conservatives have to just say enough is enough. We're not going to support this culture anymore. It is the left's culture. The left owns it. You know, enough of trying to say, hey, can I play with you? Can I play with you guys? It's like, no, let's create our own alternative and actually really put the I guess the funding and the effort and the musicians who are to be involved in that behind a different movement instead of it just constantly trying to play into the left's games, because they have that dominated so well. And I think that there is a market, though, like you said, it was a landslide victory. The people are there. It's not like we're missing the audience. We're not missing the people who want to be engaged in this. They just don't have the other option. And I think that when they get that option, whether it be pop music or classical music or jazz or rap, with the good values behind it and the musicians who have those values, I think it's going to be a breath of fresh air for so many people. So I am really excited about these next 4 years personally. I think we have a lot of work to do. I think that it's not going to be a simple thing to just flip our culture. It's not going to happen like that. But I think it is definitely worth the fight and worth the effort. And so I'm very thankful, Daniel, that you are involved in this as a singer yourself. I think that the future is very bright for musicians such as yourself. I think that if this movement, which I pray it does, moves forward the way I believe it will, I think that musicians like yourself and so many others are going to have amazing opportunities to really be a part of putting some beauty back into our culture. And so, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time. Where can our audience find you?
As far as where you can find me, www.danielirby.com. I'm all over social media as Daniel Irby Official. And I also have a business where I help public communicators, where you're a singer or a speaker, to elevate your performance from average to exceptional so that you get rehired at your events. You can have more confidence on stage, and we can elevate you to elite status. So that's where I am, as well as a business, but that's where you can find me.
Awesome, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I really hope to hear you sing sometime soon again. I know I haven't heard you live. I'd like to sometime, though, because you're a fantastic musician. Daniel, thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks, Chloe.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching this episode. You can find more of these episodes on Rumble, Spotify, and YouTube. Please subscribe on all those platforms. Also, please follow me at classically_Chloe on Instagram and classically Chloe on all other platforms. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you next week. God bless.